Blood carries memory. It clings to steel, to soil, to skin, whispering the stories of every life it once warmed. In the grim stillness before dawn, before the engines roar and the banners rise, there is a pulse in the air that does not belong to any human heart. It trembles like a caged beast, tasting the moment before slaughter, hungering for the first scream that splits the silence. Some say this pulse is simply fear echoing through the ranks of doomed soldiers. Others swear it is something older, something watching, something waiting. For in a galaxy drowning in endless war, there is one truth that stalks all battlefields. Blood is never shed alone. If you can feel that pulse too, if you know the weight of these stories and want to walk deeper into them, then stay with us, share this journey, and subscribe so we can descend together into the darkest corners of the Imperium. The mud clung to my boots with the stubbornness of a dying man refusing to let go. It wasn't ordinary mud, it carried the memory of too many bodies ground into the soil, too much blood soaking downward until the earth itself seemed to breathe with a slow, reluctant hunger. Dawn had not yet broken over the trench line, but the sky held a dim bruise of reddish light, as though the sun hesitated to rise into a world already drenched in death. I stood alone in that half-light, listening to the quiet groan of the wind as it crawled over twisted razor wire and shattered fortifications, each breath carrying the distant bite of promethium fumes from smoldering wrecks beyond the ridge. No horns sounded, no officers barked through vox grills, only the soft, rhythmic thrum of artillery far in the distance, pounding some other forsaken stretch of the front. It was the kind of silence that made the skin crawl, the kind that suggested the battlefield was merely catching its breath before the next convulsion of violence. I tightened my grip on my lasgun, though the weapon felt heavier today, as if reluctant to lift. Or perhaps it was my arm that resisted, weighed down by fatigue more spiritual than physical. Sleep had not come to me the night before. I had lain awake on the cot in our trench dugout, staring at the corrugated metal ceiling and tracing every dent, every rusted seam. My mind refused to quiet. No matter how tightly I squeezed my eyes shut, the ghost of a scream echoed from somewhere deep inside my skull, a scream I had not heard, not truly, but felt as a pressure stretching across my temples. It kept me awake long after the others slept, listening to the ragged chorus of their breathing. Now, standing at the parapet, I felt that pressure again, a slow throb, a steady pulse, as if a heartbeat deeper than my own had begun to whisper beneath the earth. I tried to ignore it. War does cruel things to nerves, and exhaustion shapes illusions from shadows. But the pulse persisted soft at first, like a memory of drums at a faraway festival from a life that no longer belonged to me. Then stronger, rolling through the ground, rattling loose stones. My breath hitched, my heartbeat stuttered in my chest, trying to match the rhythm. I blinked hard, willing the sensation to fade. It didn't. Instead, the air thickened, tasting of copper. Behind me, the trench creaked. Bedrolls rustled in the dugout. Someone coughed in their sleep. Another muttered in a fever dream. But none of them stirred fully awake. None of them reacted to the shifting air or the growing pulse. It was as though the world had narrowed until only I and that unseen heartbeat remained, locked in quiet communion. A figure approached along the trench, boots sloshing through pooled water. Trooper Rennick, broad-shouldered, scar across his jaw, a man who never wasted breath on words. He stopped beside me and looked out over the battlefield, his eyes dull with sleep. "You're up early," he murmured. "Couldn't sleep." He grunted, but his attention had already drifted. Rennick reached into his coat and produced a ration biscuit, biting into it with a wince. I waited for him to react to the strange tension in the air, the pulse beneath our feet. He didn't. Instead, he nodded toward the horizon where the sky trembled faintly, as though bruised by unseen hands. "You think they'll push today?" he asked. I almost answered, but the pulse surged, crawling up my spine, stealing the words from my throat. Rennick didn't notice. Something was wrong with me, deeply wrong. I swallowed hard and forced myself to breathe. "We'll know soon enough," I finally said. He nodded and moved along the trench, leaving me alone with the creeping sense that the world had begun to tilt slightly, like a table with one leg a fraction shorter than the others. Nothing overt had changed. The wind still moaned through the wire. The sky still held its bruise. The distant artillery still pounded its endless cadence. Yet all of it felt thinner somehow, stretched tight like the skin of a drum. The pressure in my skull deepened. A memory flashed across my mind, though it wasn't a memory I recognized. A battlefield, but not this one. A plain of cracked stone beneath a black sky, drenched in blood so fresh it shimmered like liquid rubies. I stood among a mountain of corpses, their armor unfamiliar, their mouths frozen in eternal screams. My hands were covered in gore, and in my grip hung a brutal chain axe dripping with thick strands of viscera. I gasped and stumbled backward, clawing at the trench wall. The vision snapped like a bone, leaving only a phantom ache and the pounding of my heart. My breath fogged before me in the chill air. That wasn't a dream. That wasn't madness. That was intrusion. I didn't understand how I knew that, but the certainty rooted itself deep inside me. The pulse grew louder. A shriek pierced the silence. I jerked upright, gripping my weapon, scanning the field. The shriek came again, high, metallic, desperate. A warning klaxon. Mortars screamed overhead, tearing through the early morning haze. The first shell struck far beyond the ridge, shooting a plume of dark soil high into the air. The next landed closer, then closer still. The trench shook as explosions walked toward us. The others bolted awake. "Positions!" someone yelled. "Incoming!" The quiet was shattered. Boots pounded through the trench. Orders snapped across Vox units. Troopers scrambled to firing steps, their faces still streaked with sleep and dirt. Rennick rushed back past me, shoving a helmet onto his head, lasgun already primed. The enemy barrage intensified, raining fire from the heavens. The sky lit with bursts of orange and red, each explosion blossoming like a flower of flame. The scent of burning promethium drifted across the air. The trench shuddered under the impact, earth cascading down in clumps. But even through that thunder, I still heard the pulse. It matched the artillery perfectly, beat for beat, blast for blast. It wasn't echo, it was anticipation. A shell slammed into the ridge, showering us with debris. The shockwave threw several troopers to the ground. Rennick cursed, pulling one back to his feet. I steadied myself, raising my lasgun toward the ridgeline where silhouettes emerged through the smoke. They were running at full sprint, armored shapes covered in brutal insignias, screaming as they charged. The sound was feral, raw hatred condensed into a single roar. These were no ordinary rebels. Their armor was a patchwork of spikes and gore-scratched plating. Chains clattered from their pauldrons. Symbols carved into their armor dripped with fresh blood. My stomach dropped. These were the bloodbound, traitor berserkers, devotees of the blood god, Khorne's chosen. Their cries grew louder, their weapons raised high chain axes, cleavers, serrated blades forged for tearing flesh. They sprinted with impossible speed, crossing the distance as artillery still fell around them. The pulse in the earth matched their footsteps. I stumbled back, overwhelmed by the sense that something inside me leaned toward them, recognizing their rhythm, craving it. My breath came in sharp bursts, panic clawing at my lungs. "On the line!" the sergeant bellowed. "Fire at will!" Lasgun fire erupted in a blinding volley, streaks of red lancing across the battlefield. Several berserkers fell, their bodies tumbling lifelessly down the ridge, but the others surged over them, leaping into the trench with guttural laughter. Chaos exploded around me. Rennick swung his rifle like a club, smashing it into a charging berserker's helmet. Another trooper fired point-blank into a snarling face, the impact burning through bone. Screams echoed. Blood splashed across the walls. Steel clashed against steel in frantic, desperate arcs. A berserker roared and barreled toward me, chain axe revving with a throat-shaking snarl. His eyes glowed with wild hunger, teeth bared in a grin carved from madness. Time slowed. The pulse in my skull surged, drowning out every thought. I raised my lasgun and fired. The shot struck his throat, burning a smoking hole straight through. He staggered, dropped to one knee, then collapsed forward, blood pouring into the mud. The chain axe fell from his grip, landing beside me with a heavy thud. I stared at the weapon. The pulse intensified. It wasn't coming from the earth anymore. It beat inside my chest, inside my skull, inside the axe. My vision narrowed as I reached for it. The handle felt warm, too warm, as though freshly forged. The moment my fingers closed around it, a jolt shot up my arm, seizing my breath. I felt the weight of the weapon, felt the memory buried in its steel rage, slaughter, devotion so absolute it burned away fear. Someone slammed into me from behind. I fell forward, the axe slipping from my grasp. I spun around to see another berserker lunging with a jagged blade. I barely dodged, lasgun firing. Wild. Rennick appeared from the side and tackled the traitor, both men falling into the muck with a spray of gore. I scrambled away, gasping for air. The trench was drowning in chaos. Blood soaked the walls. Severed limbs lay half buried in mud. Troopers screamed. Berserkers laughed. The sky flashed with fire. Through it all, the pulse continued, growing stronger, hungrier, demanding. I pressed my back against the trench wall, clutching my skull as the pounding inside my head rose to a fever pitch. Every heartbeat felt like a hammer blow. Every breath tasted of iron. A terrible clarity settled over me, rooting itself deep. This wasn't simple fear. This wasn't adrenaline. This wasn't madness. This was the first cut. The first mark of something watching me from beyond the blood-soaked veil of war. The first whisper of a god who needed no words to command. And as the trenches burned around me, as the screams of my comrades faded beneath the roar of berserkers, I felt a truth rise. In my chest, terrible and undeniable, Khorne had noticed me, and my blood had begun to answer. The hours after the assault blurred into a haze of smoke and trembling breath, as though the battlefield itself refused to let us remember clearly. Only fragments remained sharp, the shiver of steel passing inches from my throat, the weight of a fallen berserker's body collapsing onto the trench floor, the thick taste of blood that coated the air so completely it felt as though I were breathing through a wound. We pushed their corpses over the parapet once the charge broke, letting them slide into the no-man's land like offerings given back to the soil. But the quiet that followed did not feel like victory. It felt like the battlefield holding its breath again, storing all the violence it had just swallowed for the next eruption. I sat with my back against the trench wall, fingers trembling as I tried to clean my lasgun with a rag that had long since been soaked through. The metal felt slick and strange under my touch. In the dim light of the guttering lumen globes, the weapon seemed to pulse faintly just for a second with a reddish glow that I blinked away. It was my mind. It had to be. I closed my eyes and tried to steady my breathing, but the air tasted metallic, thick, almost warm as it slid down my throat. Every inhale reminded me of the berserker whose chain axe had nearly split me open, of the way his dying roar had vibrated through my bones, of how, for one heartbeat, I had felt something answer him inside my skull, echoing back. Rennick slumped down beside me, wiping blood from his brow. Most of it wasn't his. He tossed a dented canteen at my feet and exhaled sharply. "You look like death," he muttered. "I feel worse." He snorted, but his eyes lingered on me with a look I hadn't seen before: uncertainty, maybe even concern, though Rennick was not a man who gave voice to such things. He tilted his head toward the chain axe that still lay half buried in the muck on the far side of the trench. "You hesitated back there," he said, quietly. "Never seen you freeze like that." I didn't answer. I couldn't. The memory of touching that weapon, the way it had throbbed against my palm like a living thing, still wrapped itself around my thoughts. Rennick picked up the canteen again and drank deeply, wiping his mouth on his sleeve. "Forget about it," he muttered. "We survived. That's enough." But survival didn't feel like enough. Not now. Not with the pulse still faintly throbbing beneath the earth. I stared at my hands, steadier now, but not steady, and for a moment they didn't feel like mine. They felt heavier, as though something had coiled inside them, waiting. The sergeant's barked orders snapped me out of my spiraling thoughts. We gathered along the trench line for roll call. Only half of us answered. The rest lay scattered in pieces across the mud, their bodies contorted in violent angles. Medici teams moved among them with grim efficiency, tagging the dead, dragging the wounded to what remained of the triage dugout. The wounded didn't scream anymore. They whimpered softly or whispered strange things under their breath, as though the fight had scrambled not only their bodies but their minds. I kept catching snatches of one word repeated among them: blood, sometimes in awe, sometimes in terror, sometimes in longing. The sergeant's voice cut through the whispers like a blade. His face was streaked with soot, his eyes hollow, but his tone remained as sharp as ever. "Command says another push is coming," he announced. "We hold until reinforcements arrive." No one responded. No one had the strength to protest. We simply moved back into position, stepping over bodies and ruined weapons. As the hours passed, unease curled thickly in my stomach. Every sound felt magnified, the drip of water from broken pipes, the grunt of troopers shifting their gear, the distant rumble of artillery that never truly stopped. But beneath those familiar noises, something new trembled. A deeper resonance, a rhythm that threaded itself through the air, subtle yet unmistakable. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but when I pressed my palm against the trench wall, I felt it, a faint throb, slow, patient, awake, the same pulse that had haunted me before the attack. I jerked my hand away, heart pounding as though trying to outrun the rhythm now stitching itself into my veins. I wiped sweat from my brow. The wind cut across the trench, carrying the scent of blood and ash, but also something else, something hot, metallic, almost sweet. My senses sharpened. The world grew clearer. The mud under my feet glistened with a dark sheen. The limp bodies outside the trench drew my eye again and again, as though the blood seeping from them called to me. I blinked hard and forced myself to look away. "Still with us?" Rennick stood at my side. His voice sounded normal, but his face blurred at the edges as my heartbeat synced once more with that impossible rhythm. I swallowed hard. "Yeah," I lied. "I'm fine." But I wasn't. And when the second assault hit, I knew the lie would not hold. It came without warning, no artillery this time, no distant scream of shells breaking the sky. One moment the trench hummed with uneasy quiet, the next it erupted into chaos as shapes vaulted over the parapet with animalistic fury. Berserkers crashed into the line, their weapons blazing with murderous intensity. The trench filled with screams and steel, and the thunder of flesh striking flesh. Time fractured. A berserker lunged for me, axe swinging in a brutal arc. I blocked with my rifle, but the force knocked me back into the mud. His blade carved into the earth beside my head, spraying dirt and blood across my face. His roar shook the trench walls. His eyes blazed with violent devotion, and something inside me roared back. I felt it rise, not fear, not desperation, but anger so fierce it scorched my throat. A heat ignited beneath my ribs, burning through my limbs with a surge of strength I did not recognize. My vision sharpened until the world around me snapped into brutal clarity. The pulse in the earth aligned with the pounding in my skull. The berserker's every movement slowed, each drop of blood falling with crystalline detail. I kicked upward, slamming my boot into his knee with a crack that sent him stumbling. Before he could regain balance, I surged forward with a scream tearing from my chest. My rifle struck his jaw, snapping bone. He swung wildly, but I ducked beneath the arc and grabbed his arm, twisting violently. The joint tore with a wet pop. His scream filled my ears, but instead of fear, a dark thrill coiled inside me. I ripped the jagged blade from his hand and drove it deep into his throat. Warm blood splashed across my face, burning like steam. The berserker collapsed. I stood over him, chest heaving, limbs trembling not with exhaustion but with exhilaration. The blood on my skin pulsed with heat. My heartbeat raced in perfect time with the pulse beneath the ground. For one terrible moment, I understood why they screamed as they charged. I understood why they smiled when they bled. Rennick shouted my name, snapping the trance. I spun to see him grappling with another berserker. I tore across the trench, grabbing the fallen traitor's chain knife and slashing it across the enemy's back. The blade bit deep, sending him staggering. Rennick finished the strike, blasting a hole through the berserker's skull with his sidearm. He stared at me, chest heaving, eyes wide. "What in the throne's name?" He stopped. His gaze drifted to the blade in my hand, then to the blood smeared across my face. Something flickered behind his eyes. Fear, perhaps, or recognition of a change he couldn't name. Before either of us could speak, the enemy began to retreat. The trench fell silent except for the groans of the wounded and the drip of blood into the mud. Rennick grabbed my shoulder. "You're hurt." "I'm not." He frowned, stepping back. I followed his gaze downward. There wasn't a single wound on me, not a scratch, not a bruise, nothing. Yet I had felt steel graze my skin. I had felt fists strike my ribs. I had tasted blood that should have been mine. I wiped my face with a shaking hand. The blood that stained my skin did not belong to me. Rennick hesitated. "Something's wrong with you." He meant it as concern, but the words tasted like accusation. I looked at the ground where the berserker I had killed lay twisted. His blood pooled around him in a thick, spreading shape. It seeped into the mud, forming lines, branching patterns, a symbol I couldn't fully grasp but felt deep in my bones. A shape that pulsed faintly with the rhythm now threading through my veins. A shape that whispered of violence, of hunger, of a god who watched all blood spilled in his name. The taste of rage clung to my tongue like heat, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me, even as it thrilled something darker within, that the first cut had not been the end, it had been the beginning. Night returned like a smothering hand pressed against the sky, thick and starless, as though even the distant constellations recoiled from the carnage below. Our trench fell into a strained quiet, too quiet, the kind that left every trooper breathing slowly and carefully, afraid the air itself might shatter if disturbed. The bodies had been cleared, the wounded tended, the weapons cleaned until their metal gleamed faintly in the flickering lumen strips. But none of it eased the tension. Something lingered in the air, a heat that didn't belong to the cold night, a whisper of unrest, a pressure behind the eyes, a scent of copper that had no source. I sat alone on an ammo crate, staring at my hands. They looked normal, but they didn't feel normal. The skin tingled as though something pulsed just beneath the surface. Every so often, a shudder passed through my fingers, a tiny spasm that felt like an echo of the battle earlier. Rennick had tried to speak to me once or twice, but each time the words died on his tongue when he saw my expression. Eventually he left me alone, checking on the others or pretending to sleep. But I saw the glances he kept throwing my way, the way he touched the hilt of his knife more often than before. He wasn't the only one watching. A few troopers whispered my name. They did it quietly, but not quietly enough. They had seen the way I fought during the second assault, the sudden strength, the speed, the ferocity. They had seen the berserker's blade slice my coat without drawing blood. They had seen the hunger in my eyes, even if they didn't understand it. Now they watched from the corners of their vision, fearful but unable to look away. I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly, trying to center myself. But instead of calm, a memory rose unbidden. The moment I plunged the blade into that berserker's throat, the way the blood sprayed against my skin, the heat of it, the scent, the sound he made as he fell, it all returned vividly, too. Vividly, as though it had carved itself into my mind. I shook my head, trying to banish the memory, but it didn't leave. It lingered. It pulsed. I stood abruptly and paced toward the far end of the trench, needing distance from others, from whispers, from the weight of their gazes. The night air hit me with a rush of cold, but even that didn't fully cut through the heat coiling inside my chest. The ground vibrated faintly beneath my boots. At first I thought it was distant artillery again, but no artillery was rhythmic, predictable, mechanical. This was organic, a throbbing, a heartbeat, my own heartbeat, except stronger, louder, as though something else beat in tandem with it. I reached the end of the trench and stared out across the open field. Shapes of broken tanks and dead trees littered the landscape. Pools of old blood had frozen into dark, glassy reflections. A faint mist drifted low to the ground, swirling around the debris like restless spirits. I didn't hear Rennick approach until he spoke. "You're shaking." I didn't turn. "I'm cold." "It's not that kind of shaking." His voice was low, careful. I sensed him step closer. Not close enough to touch, but close enough to watch. "You haven't been yourself," he said. "Not since the first wave, maybe not since before it." A surge of anger flashed through me, too sudden, too hot. I clenched my fists to suppress it. "I'm fine." "No, you're not." Rennick moved to stand beside me. His silhouette against the gloom made him look older than he was. "I've seen men break. I've seen them shake, cry, babble nonsense, go hollow in the eyes, beg for the Emperor. But you, he shook his head slowly. You're not breaking, you're changing. The anger rose again, a wave threatening to crest. I forced myself to breathe through it, but the air tasted like blood again, sharp and metallic. Rennick, I said carefully, you don't understand. He cut me off. Then make me understand. I met his gaze finally. His eyes were steady, but beneath the surface I saw the flicker of doubt, fear, and something close to hope. Hope that I would deny everything he suspected. Hope that all he'd witnessed could be explained away. I opened my mouth to reassure him, but before I could speak, the pulse surged through the ground, hard, so hard the trench walls shook, so hard the lantern swayed, so hard the mist outside rippled like water disturbed. Rennick stiffened. What in the thrones? The pulse hit again, stronger. My knees buckled. I grabbed the trench wall for support as pain seared behind my eyes. A flash of red burned across my vision. I tasted blood. I felt heat flood my chest, rolling through my veins like fire. The ground beneath us throbbed with a rhythm that no longer felt distant. It felt internal, personal, hungry. Rennick grabbed my arm. "Hey, stay with me!" I tried to speak, but a choked cry escaped. Instead, the pain intensified, jagged and deliberate, as though claws raked across the inside of my skull. I fell to my knees. My hands dug into the mud, gripping it so tightly clumps burst between my fingers. I gasped for air, but each breath came out as steam in the cold night. Images flooded my mind, not flashes this time, but visions clear as waking life. A colosseum carved from bone and brass, an ocean of blood stretching to the horizon, mountains of skulls piled higher than fortresses, warriors in brass armor roaring praises to a god of war, a throne of skulls burning with eternal fire, and a presence vast, titanic, absolute, looking down, not with eyes, with hunger. My breath hitched violently. I felt that presence reach for me. Rennick's voice sounded distant, muffled. "You're burning up, Emperor's mercy, help! Someone get over here!" Hands grabbed my shoulders. Faces blurred above me, wide with alarm. The sergeant shouted orders. Several troopers tried to restrain me as my body convulsed with each pulse that tore through my veins. Then suddenly, silence. The pain snapped away. The fire cooled. The visions dissolved. I collapsed against Rennick, chest heaving, sweat dripping down my temples. He held me up, though his arms trembled. "What happened to you?" he whispered. I opened my mouth, and a voice answered from behind us. He was called. We spun around. A figure stood at the edge of the trench, one of the wounded we had dragged in earlier, Trooper Holden. I recognized him by the bandage wrapped around his head, stained with dried blood. But something was wrong. His posture was too rigid. His eyes were too wide. His smile was too calm. Rennick stiffened. "Holden, you should be resting." Holden didn't respond. Instead, he stepped closer, boots sloshing in the mud. "Khorne calls those who bleed well," Holden whispered, "and he answers those who spill blood with purpose." Rennick drew his sidearm. "Step back." Holden didn't. He lifted his hands, showing palms marked with fresh cuts, symbols etched into the skin with unnatural precision. "Do you hear it yet?" Holden asked softly, staring at me. "Do you hear his drum, his heartbeat, his thirst?" The pulse surged again inside my chest, answering him. Rennick swore under his breath. "What did you do to him?" Holden smiled deeper. "I did nothing. The blood god sees. The blood god chooses. The blood god whispers to the worthy." The world tilted. Holden lunged. Rennick fired. The shot hit Holden square in the chest. He staggered but didn't fall immediately. Instead, he laughed softly at first, then louder. The sound twisted with something inhuman. Blood poured from the wound, steaming in the cold air. Finally, he collapsed face first into the mud, laughter echoing long after his body stilled. No one moved. No one breathed. Rennick lowered his gun slowly. What in the Emperor's name was that? I didn't answer, because I knew something he didn't, something that rose in me like a tide swallowing shore. Holden hadn't been speaking to Rennick. He'd been speaking to me. And worse, I had heard the whispers he spoke of. I had felt the pull. I had tasted the rage. I had seen the throne of skulls. The blood god had stretched a hand toward me, and part of me had reached back. Rennick grabbed my shoulder, shaking me. "Tell me what's happening to you." I looked at him, and in the reflection of his widening eyes, I saw it, my own gaze, no longer steady, burning faintly red. The Medicae tent was a dim, suffocating space, lit only by a few flickering lumen lamps that swayed with each restless gust of wind that wormed its way through the torn canvas. The air inside was hot and stale, saturated with the scent of antiseptic paste and iron-rich blood that clung stubbornly to everything it touched. Rows of wounded lay on rusted cots, their breaths rattling in shallow rhythms. Some whispered prayers, others muttered broken words, still lost in the terror of the battlefield. And above all of it hung a silence so thick and brittle it felt ready to crack. They brought me here after Haldan's collapse, no, after Haldan's transformation. The sergeant insisted I be examined. Shock, he said. Stress. But when the Medicae touched the pulse at my neck, his fingers trembled, his brows furrowed. He checked again, pressing harder. I felt every beat of my heart slam against his touch like a fist against a door. He stepped back slowly. Your pulse is strange. What does that mean? Rennick asked sharply. The Medicae swallowed. It doesn't feel natural. He left it at that. No auspex, no diagnosis, no explanation. I could tell he struggled to decide whether I was a patient or an omen. Eventually, they let me sit on a cot near the entrance, where the draft chilled the sweat, still clinging to my skin. Rennick paced nearby, boots scuffing against the dirt floor as though he could grind his worry into the ground. His jaw remained tight, his hands clenched behind his back. Every few seconds, he glanced at me, as if expecting another convulsion, another burst of impossible strength, another moment where some unseen force reached through me. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The wounded moaned. The lamps flickered. The world outside felt distant, muted, as if this tent hung suspended in a limbo between life and death. I stared at the dirt between my boots, feeling the weak tremors of something underneath, something that should not have been there. Something that echoed my heartbeat despite coming from a depth far beneath the soil. Eventually, Rennick stopped pacing. Look, he said quietly, kneeling so he could meet my eyes. I've known you for years. You've never been reckless, never been violent unless forced. That thing earlier, that wasn't you. The words should have comforted me. They didn't. Because deep down, in the place where the pulse now lived, I wondered whether he was wrong. It didn't feel like someone else, I whispered. Rennick's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? I swallowed hard, hands shaking slightly. When the berserker charged me, I felt something open, like a door in my chest, like there was strength waiting, watching. And when I fought, when I stopped, unable to bring myself to say the rest. The memory of blood spraying across my face, the warmth of it, the satisfaction of overpowering an enemy, it made my stomach twist and my heart accelerate. Rennick stood abruptly. You're not one of them, he said firmly. You're not. But the way his voice cracked at the end betrayed his doubt. The flap of the tent rustled. The sergeant entered, mud splattered across his armor, eyes haunted by exhaustion. He looked at me as though calculating how much burden I represented. But behind the caution, I saw something else, a flicker of fear. We've received reports, he began. Other trenches, other squads. He took a deep breath. Some of the traitors weren't acting alone. What does that mean? Rennick asked. They were guided, the sergeant said. Driven by something, unseen, something pushing them forward. The pulse in my chest throbbed in agreement, and I tensed. What kind of something? I asked, though a terrible guess already curled inside me. The sergeant looked at me for a long moment before responding. Witnesses spoke of feeling a presence, a pressure. Some described hearing faint whispers before the attacks. Others claimed their own men turned on them mid-battle, men who weren't wounded, weren't touched, but suddenly changed. Changed. Like Haldan. Like me. The sergeant crossed his arms. Command believes there may be cult infiltration. Chaos influence. Rennick scoffed. Influence? We watched Haldan laugh with a hole in his chest before he dropped dead. That wasn't infiltration. That was something else. The sergeant grimaced. All the more reason for us to be cautious. Cautious. The word felt too small for the terror threading through the tent. The sergeant turned to leave, but paused at the entrance. He didn't look back as he said, Keep an eye on him. Rennick bristled. "He's not, we don't know what he is," the sergeant snapped, then stepped out into the night. Rennick ran a hand through his hair, muttering curses. His frustration filled the small space like smoke, but I barely heard him. The pulse had returned softer now, but steady. A presence brushing the edges of my awareness like fingers tracing the inside of my skull. It was not a voice, it was not language, it was hunger. A soft glow flickered at the far end of the tent. I turned my head sharply. No one else reacted, but I saw it just for a heartbeat, a faint shimmer of red light hovering above one of the wounded men. He lay motionless, chest rising shallowly. Blood had seeped through the bandages wrapped around his midsection, forming a dark stain. The light pulsed with each of his breaths, a soft, rhythmic beat. I rose from the cot without realizing it. Rennick stepped toward me. "What is it?" I didn't answer. My feet carried me forward, drawn by that pulse, by that glow. The wounded man's eyes fluttered open as I approached. They weren't the eyes of a trooper anymore. They were unfocused, dilated, glassy with fever. His lips parted. "Blood," he whispered weakly. Rennick tensed. No, not again. But this was different. The man wasn't offering devotion. He wasn't praising a dark god. He was pleading. Blood hurts. He wasn't calling for it. He was afraid of it. A violent spasm tore through his body. He arched off the cot, mouth open in a silent scream. The red glow intensified, wrapping around him like tendrils of mist. I stumbled back as the air warped around him, the temperature rising sharply. "No," Rennick muttered, backing away. "No, no, no." The man convulsed once more, then went still. The glow vanished. The lamps flickered back to their dim light. The tent returned to its suffocating quiet. But the pulse inside my chest surged so sharply it stole my breath. "Khorne," I whispered without meaning to. Rennick grabbed my arm. "Don't say his name." I met his gaze, voice trembling. It wasn't devotion that killed him. It wasn't summoning. It was attention. Rennick froze. "Whose attention?" The answer lay, heavy in my throat, but I couldn't force the word out. I didn't need to. Rennick already knew. A sudden scream tore through the camp outside, then another. The crack of lasguns followed, the muffled roar of someone or something charging. The entire tent shook as if something large barreled past it. Rennick drew his sidearm, eyes wide. They're attacking again? But no horn sounded. No warning klaxon. No coordinated defense orders. This wasn't an organized assault. This was chaos erupting inside the camp. A mortally wounded trooper crashed through the tent flap, collapsing at our feet. Blood gushed from a deep wound in his neck. His fingers clawed at the ground as he choked out fragmented words. Red, eyes, killing, everyone. Rennick crouched beside him. Who's killing everyone? The trooper coughed a spray of blood. Our own men. He went still. Outside, the screams multiplied. Rennick grabbed my wrist. "We need to move." He dragged me through the chaos erupting beyond the tent. Fires burned in patches across the camp, casting long shadows that danced like demons across the dirt. Troopers sprinted in every direction, some fleeing, others fighting invisible foes, slashing wildly at the air. The smell of burning promethium choked the wind. Then I saw them. Men with red eyes. Men who had fought beside us hours ago. Men who now charged at their former comrades with serrated blades scavenged from dead berserkers. Some moved with jerky, unnatural motions, others with terrifying fluidity. But all of them screamed the same word as they attacked. "Blood." Rennick pulled me behind a fallen barricade. "This is madness. They're being turned." But I didn't flinch, because the pulse in my chest responded to each scream. It marked each kill as though tallying them. It reveled in the chaos. Rennick grabbed my shoulders. "Listen to me. Whatever is happening, fight it." I stared at him, breath shaking. "I don't know if I can." He gripped me harder. "You can, because you're still you. You're still here." But was I? The pulse grew louder, hotter, fiercer. And as fire spread across the camp, as blood pooled beneath the dying, as shadows twisted and men became monsters driven by unseen whispers, I felt a terrible truth settle inside my bones. This wasn't corruption. This wasn't infection. This was calling. And the worst part, the part that terrified me more than anything happening around us, was the growing certainty that a part of me wanted to answer. The world was burning by the time we reached the shattered remains of the command outpost. Fire crawled up the sides of overturned Munitorum crates, casting long crimson tongues across the dirt. Smoke twisted into strange shapes above us, rising like spectral banners claimed by some unseen army. The camp had dissolved into a battlefield, without sides, without formation, without sanity. Troopers fought troopers. Wounded crawled through blood-slick mud, only to be dragged back down by red-eyed comrades, who now screamed praises to a god whose name made the air shudder. The ground shook beneath every footstep, not from artillery but from something deeper, older, eager. Rennick pulled me through the chaos with a grip so tight it numbed my wrist. He wasn't talking anymore. He wasn't asking questions. Survival overrode everything, even fear. I followed him not because he dragged me, but because I needed his presence to keep my mind anchored. Every smell, every sound, every scream fed the pulse inside my chest. It throbbed wildly now, sinking with every spilled drop of blood around us. Each death echoed inside my skull, like a reverberating drumbeat, demanding a response. We ducked behind a broken chimera hull as a group of our own soldiers charged past, their faces contorted in savage ecstasy, their hands gripping blades torn from traitor corpses. One of them paused, sniffed the air like an animal, then turned toward our hiding place. His eyes burned red in the firelight. Rennick lifted his lasgun. The trooper sprinted toward us. I reacted before Rennick could pull the trigger. My hand shot out and grabbed the attacker's wrist mid-swing. The strength in my grip shocked even me. Bones cracked beneath my fingers. The trooper shrieked once, a sharp sound that cut through the roar of flames. I twisted and hurled him aside. He struck a pile of debris with a dull thud and didn't rise again. Rennick stared at me. Horror etched clearly across his features, but we didn't have time to speak. The ground throbbed again, hard enough to rattle the tank hull above us. Something deep in the earth howled in response, a sound too low for ears yet still capable of shaking the bones inside my body. I pressed a hand to my chest, grimacing as heat surged through my bloodstream. "Rennick," I whispered. "It's getting worse." He didn't slow, didn't look back, only muttered. Then we run faster. We pushed forward through smoke, so thick it felt like wading through ash. Figures loomed and vanished like ghosts caught halfway between dying and waking. Every shape flickered with red light. Every breath carried the metallic tang of blood. My heartbeat hammered louder and louder, drowning out the crackle of flames. The pulse guided me, showing paths through wreckage, warning me a moment before a collapsing support beam fell near us, whispering when a fanatic lurked behind a supply crate, ready to strike. Rennick didn't realize it, but I was, the one weaving us through the carnage, led by an instinct that wasn't entirely mine. At last, we reached the outskirts of camp, where scattered hills rose like black teeth against the burning sky. We stumbled up the nearest slope, slipping on loose shale, scrambling for footing. When we reached the top, the view hit us like a hammer. The battlefield below had transformed. The fires formed a ring, a perfect, impossible circle. Inside it, bodies piled in a spiral pattern, arranged by no human hands. A symbol, a sign, a mark etched into the land. My throat tightened. Rennick's breath hitched beside me. "What is that?" he whispered. But I knew, even if I wished I didn't. The spiral of corpses throbbed in time with my heartbeat. With every pulse, the flames brightened. The air burned hot enough to sting my eyes. "It's a ritual," I murmured. "A summoning. Not by them, by us." Rennick turned slowly toward me. His expression was not anger or shock, it was sorrow. "You feel it, don't you?" I didn't answer, but he heard the truth in the silence. A scream echoed across the field, sharp and piercing. At first I thought it was another trooper falling to madness, but then the sound deepened, rolled like thunder, and tore itself into a roar so powerful it shook the hillside. Something rose within the spiral, something enormous. A shape made of fire and shadow horned, crowned by flame, draped in chains that clattered like laughter. A massive silhouette forged from pure fury. Its presence crushed the air, bending it downward. My knees nearly buckled. The pulse in my chest surged into a frantic beat until my vision blurred. Rennick grabbed my arm. "We have to go, now." But my feet stayed rooted, because the figure turned slowly, deliberately, and looked straight at me. My breath stopped, not because of fear, because something inside me recognized the gaze. A whisper threaded through my mind, not a voice, but a sensation like the heat of blood spilled freshly on stone, like the roaring of 1,000 battles, like the final breath of dying foes. A command, a promise, a hunger. Rennick pulled me harder. "Don't listen, don't look." But I couldn't tear my gaze away. Another roar erupted from the creature. Flames whipped outward, spreading across the battlefield in tendrils that burned without consuming. Red lightning cracked across the sky. The ground trembled beneath our boots. Men who still clung to sanity dropped to their knees, clutching their heads and screaming. The corrupted ones laughed, raising their blades, basking in the heat like pilgrims before a sacred altar. Rennick's grip tightened desperately. "Please come on." His voice cut through the haze, just enough for me to move again. I tore my gaze away, panting, and forced my legs to run. We descended the opposite slope, sliding through the dark mud, stumbling over shattered rock. The air cooled slightly, but the pulse didn't fade. If anything, it followed us, tugging at my ribs like invisible chains. Rennick led us into the ruins of an old watchtower long since abandoned. Its stone walls were cracked, its roof half gone, but it provided shelter from the flames, and a moment, just a moment of quiet. We collapsed behind the crumbling parapet, gasping for breath. Rennick leaned back against the wall and wiped soot from his face. His hands shook. "That thing," he whispered. "Was it a daemon?" I nodded slowly. "A manifestation of him." "Yes." Rennick closed his eyes tightly. "Emperor, protect us." I didn't respond. The Emperor's protection felt distant, muted, and deep down, I feared it might no longer extend to me at all. Rennick opened his eyes again. "We need to get off this front, fall back to the ridge. Maybe we can radio for evac." "They won't evacuate us," he frowned. "Why not?" I turned to him. "Because command will classify this entire area as compromised, as tainted. They will glass it from orbit before letting any of us leave." Rennick stared, horror settling into his features. "You're saying we're already dead?" "No," I said quietly. "I'm saying they'll kill us before the blood god claims us completely." Rennick stood abruptly, fists clenched in defiance. "Then we escape before they decide anything." He reached for my arm, but I pulled back this time. Rennick froze. "What's wrong?" I pressed a trembling hand to my chest. The heat inside me grew sharper. The pulse shifted, no longer random, no longer chaotic. It beat in a pattern, a rhythm, a drum, a war drum. My vision wavered. The red glow returned at the edges. I felt my fingernails dig into my palms as I fought the rising heat. "I don't think I can leave," I whispered. Rennick stepped closer. "Yes, you can." "No," I said again, voice cracking. "It's in me. It's not you. You don't understand." "I do," Rennick snapped, grabbing my shoulders again. "I know you. I know who you are. You are not his." But the ground trembled again, and this time the pulse came from me. Rennick's eyes widened. He stepped back slowly, shaking his head. "No." My breath grew ragged. My vision swirled with red. My heart pounded like a hammer against iron. Every beat spilled heat through my limbs. Every breath brought the scent of blood sharper, sweeter. Every thought splintered under the weight of the god's gaze still lingering across the battlefield. I felt something rise inside me. Not possession, not corruption, recognition. The presence pressed into my mind, heavy, vast, endless. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. It flooded my senses with the essence of war, of fury, of triumph carved in flesh. Images flashed again, the ocean of blood, the mountains of skulls, the throne watching over an infinite battlefield. Khorne, the blood god. He did not whisper. He demanded. I fell to my knees, gripping my head as the heat exploded through me. Rennick rushed forward, trying to hold me still. "Fight it!" he shouted. "You have to fight it!" But the pulse drowned his words. The drumbeat silenced his voice. The heat burned away his touch. My vision blurred red, fire, blood, then suddenly stillness. I knelt in the ruins, gasping. The heat dulled. The pulse softened. But the connection remained, coiled deep inside like a brand carved into the soul. Rennick knelt before me, face pale, eyes shining with something between fear and desperate hope. "Are you still, you?" I looked at him. The answer felt like a blade balanced on edge. "I don't know." The fire on the horizon roared, casting a bloody dawn across the ruined battlefield. The demon's silhouette still towered within the burning spiral, calling for warriors, for offerings, for blood. And deep inside me, the drumbeat answered. But above that beat, faint, fragile, trembling a different rhythm, stirred my own heartbeat. I held onto it, barely. Rennick extended a hand. "Then we run," he said softly, "before the next beat takes you completely." I hesitated, heat rising in my chest like a warning. Then, with the last quiet piece of myself, I could still claim I took his hand. And together, we fled the burning world behind us, racing against a god's hunger, knowing the red path stretched far ahead, and that my soul balanced on its edge, one heartbeat away from being claimed forever.